Askreddit. What did you learn embarrassingly late? When I was 20, I was presented with a really wonderful promotion. It required me to fly to a nearby state for a week of training. I was super ecstatic about the whole thing until I remembered a friend of mine complaining about her struggles with getting a passport. So, I promptly declined the promotion. My superiors were really stumped as to why I turned down the promotion. Me, unfortunately, I don't have a passport. Manager, boring Barry, you've never flown before, have you? Me, no. I have not. Manager, you don't need a passport to fly within the country. And then it hit me, my friend was going to Mexico. I was just going to a neighboring state. Once the realization hit, my superiors all erupted in laughter. The story itself followed me when I went to training. My trainer personally greeted me and asked me if I had any difficulties getting a passport before laughing. Thought an orgasm and an organism were the same thing. Gave an entire speech to my class at 13 years old, first month at a new school, about how I wanted to be a marine biologist and work with marine organisms. Everyone was laughing, and I didn't know why. The teacher didn't say anything, just laughed along as well. A girl I'd just made friends with had to fill me in after class. Turns out, they are definitely not the same thing. This pained me to read. My wife told me in 5th grade she did an anti-drug speech and used John Lennon as an example of a successful person who stands against drugs. She liked the Beatles and hated drugs, so she just assumed he would never. Ambulances don't patrol around like police cars. But in some big cities they do hang around in certain areas that are known to be accident prone during rush hour. Plus tow trucks. Or in little towns, when the town's one ambulance goes on a call, the neighboring town's ambulance drives to the halfway point between the towns to be able to respond to either. Till some towns only have one ambulance. Some towns have no ambulance and response times are so long you are better off hitchhiking to the hospital. That my cat didn't go back to the pet store when it was sick. I had even heard all the jokes about pets going to the farm. Still didn't strike me till way too late. When I was in 2nd grade, my hamster died. I wanted to hold a funeral, naturally. Mom insisted on sending him off for an autopsy first. We watched a lot of medical shows, so I was super understanding of why this was necessary. Since the closest facility for hamster autopsies was quite far away, she would send him out, and they would bury him for me, since the return shipping would be traumatic to his poor little hamster remains. After about 6 months of waiting for the autopsy report to come in the mail, I insisted she call and check back in. She said they were working on the report, these things just take time. In 10th grade it hit me that IHOP is the International House of Pancakes. I never made the connection that they were the same thing, so until recently I thought the International House of Pancakes was like a Hall of Fame type museum restaurant for pancakes. I'm old. Originally IHOP literally had international pancakes on their menu and about 20 flavors of syrup on each table on a carousel. The first time I took my son to IHOP I was telling him the different choices he had for syrup. When I told him boysenberry he freaked out a little because he thought I said poisonberry. Riding a bicycle. I learnt it at 18. My parents believed in an astrologer who told them that I would have a terrible accident when I drive or ride. So I had to learn bicycle secretly from a friend. Edit, I did get into an accident, but who doesn't? I love my parents and I'm super happy with my childhood. This is the only thing I had to keep up with. Now they see the logic and risk associated with the things I do and always support me. I'm Indian. Pilot and co-pilot actually has the same hierarchy. I thought that co-pilot is some kind of assistant to the pilot. Edit, I didn't expect this to blow up, but thanks for the insight. I guess to clarify my first statement, I thought that co-pilot will be promoted to be the pilot. The revelation that I experienced was when both of the pilot and co-pilot of my flight address themselves as captain. They both can have the same rank. The captain and first officer are often thought of as pilot and co-pilot. While not technically wrong, their duties per leg boil down to who is pilot flying and pilot monitoring. Both pilots will take turns performing different roles, but also have their permanent responsibilities, such as the captain being the final authority for all decision making. In case anyone was wondering how to make friends, I grew up alone. I had a few friends, but most of the time I was alone. I spent entire summers alone, but out of the house, because I wasn't allowed to be in the house. I was the kid no one could be seen with, so no one would talk to me, and what they didn't treat me well. If someone became my friend, it didn't last long. With not being able to see them outside of school and the crap they had to go through to be my friend, people just couldn't handle it, and would turn on me to save themselves. I don't blame any of them for it. When I went to uni I was completely messed up. I didn't know how to talk to people, or have a conversation. I actually learned from a Reddit post, and started practicing on the people I wanted to be friends with. You know what happened? It freaking worked. People started asking me to hang out with them and do things. I learned how to joke around, and when to come in with funny comments, learned when to talk, and when not to. What I could and couldn't talk about. Turns out I seem to be pretty fun to be around, as I have a solid group of friends now who ask me to hang out, and do stuff constantly. This weekend we're all going to a food festival, then out to the cinema to see it, bouldering and doing the cycling event. Some of us played games over the PS4 last night. It took me until my late 20s to get here though. I just never got to learn this stuff growing up like my peers. I still struggle interacting with girls. They have this specific way they interact, and I've never been able to figure it out. It's frustrating, but I have a few female friends now, so it's not a big deal, but I would like to understand it. I could go weeks without saying a word to anyone. I remember when I was 16 over 17, and I just stopped trying to talk to people one day. Nothing in my life changed. Mum still screamed at me and had her one-sided arguments with me. Kids in school were still huge penis. The only difference was me refusing to answer questions in class, stopped the class from devolving into them all yelling at me and making stupid noises. No one noticed I had just given up. That snapping your fingers at a waiter was very impolite. Grew up watching movies where people would do it, and I thought it was cool. Went to a classmate's birthday party. Her parents were rich, so ended up in a very nice restaurant. Everything was going well until a girl spilled something, and I thought I would be cool and walked over, started wiping everything with my table napkin, which everyone seemed to think was gentlemanly, and then immediately stood up straight and snapped my fingers very loudly and signaled across the room that I needed a new napkin. The birthday girl was not thrilled, since her family came all the time and knew nearly everyone that worked there. Nobody explained to me what I had done until much later, when we were back at her house. Still makes me cringe when I think about it. That you need to get oil changes regularly. I got a Ford Ranger when I was 16 and put over 100,000 kilometers on it over the next 2 years. I lived in the middle of nowhere with nothing else to do, and it wasn't until my dad asked me when I'd last had it serviced and said, "It sounds like it's running a bit rough," that I came to realize that oil changes were a thing you had to do regularly. I don't, for the life of me, know how that truck survived 2 years and 2 Canadian prairie winters on the same old summer oil. Until I was about 16 I thought plants, greenery, took in CO2, and put out oxygen, and flowers did the opposite. When asked in class about ways of stopping greenhouse gas emissions I said, why not just cut down all the flowers? Room was silent, teacher was confused. I sat down and said nothing. Bearing in mind this was an advanced biology class and I would regularly be top of the class. Ended up with an A* despite failing to hand in any coursework because I aced my exams. To this day I still wonder how I got that idea and why I wholeheartedly believed and nobody corrected me for years and years. Duct tape is for air ducts. We were watching this old house and they were repairing an air duct, and I said with duct tape, and my husband said, well, it is a duct. I thought it a brand name. I live in a non-English country and our English teacher always speaks in English, and she called some tests a checkups. I thought it was stupid using the words checkup when you are talking about a test, so about half a year in I already told my friends how stupid it was to call a test checkup. So then I go to my mom, who studied English since I was a toddler, and asked her why is my English teacher calling the test a checkup. She told me we are synonyms. I was in shock and incredibly red, so I excused myself and went to my room. I was in shock, laughing my ass. Then texted my friends and then started to listen more in English class. Also, my teacher has a really bad accent, and when she speaks English it sounds like an Arabic person trying to talk in Japanese and then incredibly failing, but not noticing it. That I live in the ghetto. I found out one day that one fact because I, being a 9-year-old, wanted to play in the backyard. I immediately regretted that decision. I saw a black man on his roof drunk and smoking a blunt with a dildo on his head. He pulled out a gun when he saw me and shot. He missed. There is a bullet hole going through the aluminum gutter and out the other side. I went back inside and my mom thought that I set off a firecracker because she smelled smoke and heard a bang. Me being the stupid white child I was, I said that I did it. She called the cops because she didn't know where I got a firecracker. In the middle of February, the guy on the roof shot a policeman and fell off of the roof, and at the time I didn't know what a dildo was, but when he fell, the whole 10 inches of that dildo went in his mouth. 10 inches. The cop who was shot was laughing so hard that he could barely put handcuffs on the man who was now unconscious. That's Gordon Heights, Bartow, Florida for you. Sounds like the infamous Florida man was your neighbor. Seems legit. I've lived in the same house with my dad for 15 years and he always had a wardrobe in the living room with some stuff in it. So, one day we got a message that we had to move because they were gonna demolish our neighborhood to build new houses. So, while we were moving our stuff to the new place, I had to carry that heavy wardrobe through the back door. Whilst trying to fit it through to door, I smashed it into the wall by accident. Glass flew all over the place and the rest just kinda collapsed. My dad got mad and later I learned that it was made by our family in the 1800s. Learning that making more in the US and just hitting the next tax bracket doesn't mean you will be taxed at that higher amount for all of your earnings. Seriously thought I would make less if I barely went into the next bracket until I was 26. I'm sure my bosses loved that idiot. Not me, but my brother, and there's two things. Firstly, he didn't know that your sternum isn't your scrotum until he was 13. Secondly, he didn't know that women have more than one hole. I'm not talking just within the vaginal area. I mean that he thought women just have an jerk, you put it in there, and they crap out babies. I was 13 when my aunt took me aside and said, "Does your little sister still believe in Santa? We brought her an extra present, but we are not sure if it should be from Santa or us." I was like, I think so. Because I did until just now. OMG, what the is but dude, my parents even showed me pictures of Santa drinking beer with them on Christmas Eve when I was 8, baby. Everything is a lie. I just hadn't really thought about it. Santa exists. Moving on. This changed my life. I began questioning everything, searching for the truth, and looking for how our fallible human perception can color our experience of truth. Ended up majoring in philosophy. I'm 28 and just barely learned that having a savings is pretty important. Lots of duck, I don't have money for that in my life. Some benefits to being young and irresponsible though. You have a lot of cool, useless, expensive house. I have a professional grade poker table with real chips from casinos. I have an $800 Yamaha keyboard that I never learned how to play. I have a $700 graphic drawing tablet, and I still don't know how to draw. Two things that come to my mind. Learning to swim. I only learned it when I was like 13 over 14. I was deadly afraid of water and of drowning, so father taught me how to stay above the water one day and then slowly showed me the movements to swim. I went from being not able to swim to being able to swim in 20 minutes. Tying my shoes. I never really got it as a kid and was then too embarrassed to ask how it was done. I only learned it when I was 20 from a YouTube video. It was a thing of 10 minutes. I don't understand why it took me so long. I'm a guy with long hair. I've had long hair as long as I can remember. I think there are some pictures of me at like 3 years old with short hair, but whatever. Anyway, I only just learned, about half a year ago, how to keep my hair out of my face. The trick is to put the front of your hair behind the ears. And then I realized pretty much every girl with long hair does exactly the same, and I just hadn't picked up on it. I mean, I had, but I'd assumed that it was a looks thing, rather than a practical thing. I mean, I only do it when I absolutely need my hair out of my face, but even so, I was a little embarrassed. Plastic comes from oil. Being smart in elementary school doesn't mean crap for middle through college. Probably late and probably not that big bit. I felt so embarrassed when I found out. When I was fairly young, every Tuesday evening an ice cream van would pull up on our street and we would buy a medium flake. Eventually my parents began becoming friends with the driver and joked about with him every week. One week my parents decided to let me order the usual medium ice cream. I didn't want a medium, I wanted a large, so I demanded a large. To get me to shut up, my parents said to the van driver he'll have a large medium. I thought as a kid, wow, this must be a special type, so every week I would ask for a large medium. Eventually as I got older no one told me this was made up, so I kept going around with this in my head assuming it was a secret menu item. I was around the age of 16 when I went with a friend and an ice cream van, not the same guy, pulled up and my friends suggested some. I did my usual large medium and the driver looked at me like I wasn't English. My friend eventually ordered 2 mediums and asked me what I meant. I later went home to ask my parents, and they burst out laughing that I tried it in public. I couldn't stomach ice cream for a while after that. When I was about 4 we got 2 goldfish. One with a black tail and one that was fully orange/gold. We called them black currant and carrot respectively, and they were our first ever pets. One day black currant's tail turned orange, which was strange, but I just accepted it. At some point in the last couple of years, I'm 20 now, it came up in conversation somehow, and my parents realized I'd genuinely believed it my whole life. They told me that the fish had died and been replaced, and they didn't think I'd even believe that. My whole life with that fish was a lie. That Compton was a city in California. I'm not entirely sure how this got into my mind, but when I was younger at some point I picked up believing that Compton was the name of a big prison in the US. I guess because it had a strong association with crime. I don't know, but I thought straight out Compton was a way of saying you just got out of prison. I was in my 20s before I realized they were talking about an actual city that had nothing to do with prison. My brother made me believe that I was born a boy and that, because my parents already had a boy, they decided to cut my willy off at birth. It was a good 5 years of believing this before I realized this wasn't a thing. It's still the one thing that he is most proud of. He and I are 35 and 32 respectively. Penis. My cousin's teenage daughter was put on Depo-Provera shot. It is given every 3 months to prevent pregnancy. She never told her daughter what it was for, and while it was none of my business to say anything to the kid, she asked me what I thought about it. Since I'm a nurse, I told her she needs to be honest with her daughter. Telling her not to have sex, it's not going to stop it, and it was a good idea that she has another form of protection so she won't catch any sexual transmitted diseases, that is, use a condom too. A few months later she got pregnant. That girls don't pee and give birth out of the same hole. Until about 6th grade, I used to think pretzels were made from tree branches that were soaked in water to get rid of the splinters. Mind you, I was a straight A student, always in accelerated classes. How to use chopsticks. As a child, my mother always tried to get me to use them properly, but I just used them my way. That is, until my latest trip to Japan to visit family. At that point I was old enough to be self-aware and embarrassed in public, and I quickly relearned how to use them during that trip, so that I wouldn't look like an idiot. When I was 11 I wholeheartedly believed in Santa. Looking back on it, I could tell my parents just didn't have the courage to tell me. They dabbled on the subject, but I made it clear I didn't want to hear it. My little sister, 9 at the time, told me Christmas Day 2006. I wouldn't say I was too old to know that Santa wasn't real. I would just say that my sister is a bitch and I wish she was never ducking born. I don't need to have extra room for my feet to grow when buying shoes as an adult. They're done growing, and my shoe size went down. This more funny than embarrassing. We moved to California late 1957 from New York. My mom was from a large Italian Catholic family. Most of our summer vacations were my dad driving us across the country to New York to visit family and friends. But summer of 1966 my dad couldn't get the time off work to go with us, so it was my mom, one of my 3 older brothers and me taking a Greyhound bus. I was 11 going on 12. As it started to get dark I asked my mom, in a voice loud enough for all the passengers to hear, "Mom, when do we put on our pajamas?" That got a big laugh, but I was serious. All I knew was we'd be riding all night and I pictured everyone sleeping at that time, pillows and blankets handed out, and nighttime was for pajamas and nightgowns. No, I didn't include the bus driver as one who changed into PJs. Oh, the innocence of youth. My grandparents were obsessed with watching Hard Copy and talked a lot about how people will rob you and kill you if you weren't careful. They were especially obsessed with the potential of being robbed. They had a tiny house full of old crap, and yet they were the only people I knew of in the 80s to have an actual alarm system. Anytime we all left the house and came back, it would have to be disarmed. Over the course of several visits, my grandfather used what I knew of their paranoia of being robbed to convince me that the way their alarm system worked was that it was hooked up to a bomb that would blow up the house and everything and everyone in it, because it was better to blow everything up than to let a thief take it. I didn't believe him at first, but he kept on. It was very convincing, and managed to convince me that him and my grandmother were so paranoid about it that they took their alarm system to the next level. I did not think other people's alarms worked that way. Every time my grandparents took us to a restaurant, when we came back to the house, he would pretend to forget the code to their alarm system, and I would be jumping up and down anxiously and yelling stuff to try to get him to remember the code to the alarm system, because I thought my whole family was going to blow up if he didn't. Everyone saw how anxious him pretending to forget the code made me, but apparently no one knew why, cause somehow he managed to keep it on the DL. I think I even confronted them about how could they be so cool-headed given the stakes, and they just didn't know what I was talking about. One time, I felt like it was really stuffy in their house, and I went to open a window, and their alarm went off. My grandfather was furious, and told me under his breath that he hoped I was happy. My recklessness almost killed my whole family. My family is more than a little ducked up. I was completely poleaxed by the idea that such a minor thing like opening the window without permission could have killed my whole family, and was haunted by that in years to come. I was in my 20s when I casually mentioned to my parents, as an example of people going overboard, how my grandparents had their house alarm connected to a bomb, and my mom was like, "Wait, what?" And based on her facial expression and that of my other family members, I was like, "Wait, that's not a thing that people do, is it?" And realized I'd been duped for about 20 years. I had 2 pretty rats when I was 5, and me and my parents had to move to an apartment that didn't allow pets, so my mom and dad took them to a place where they could play basketball. At 5 I didn't really catch it and was just upset, and when as I got older I questioned it, but when I was 8 and went to Discovery Place, I saw a man teaching a rat how to play basketball, and I knew that my parents were right. A year ago they broke the news that they took them to the vet to be put down. We also just got another pet rat for my brother, and one day when he went to go say goodbye to it before he went to school, it was not in its cage. After 3 days my dog had found it, and my parents revealed to only me, big sister who knew everything, that if they didn't find the rat in a week, then they'd start hiding rat traps, and go back to the place we bought the rat, and buy a similar looking one, and say that they found it. And I know my brother would fall for that.